Hello, welcome to Plant Party. We're talking about monitoring native vegetation. Today's Plant Party is hosted by Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. Plant Party is a quarterly webinar series intended for advanced plant training and education fund. I'm Megan Clayton, professor and extension range specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. My co-hosts are Charles Kniper, State Resource Conservationist with USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Tim Sigmund, the Private Lands Program Leader with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Our first presenter today is Brandon Bean. Brandon is a grazing specialist with Texas NRCS out in Palestine, Texas. He has worked with East Texas NRCS for over 15 years. He graduated in a degree of animal science from Texas A&M in 2008. Brandon is a husband and father and enjoys spending time with family and being outdoors. Today, he'll be presenting on picking the right monitoring tool. Thanks for kicking off our plant party, Brandon.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the party. So today we're going to be talking about monitoring, and specifically, I'm going to be talking to you about picking the right monitoring tool. So it's always interesting and fun when you get to go out on a site visit with a rancher, and this is what you pull up and see. You can tell this gentleman has put a lot of thought into the day, and he is prepared for whatever we may run across. He has all the tools in his tool belt ready to go there, and hopefully, after today, you'll have some new tools that you can utilize in your monitoring projects on your property. So why monitor? How do you know if you get there if you don't know where you're going? How do you measure success? I recently attended an event where ranchers were discussing, what they wanted to do out there, what goals they were trying to achieve. But when asked the question of how do we measure success, they did not have an answer. So it's going to be hard to go anywhere if you don't know what success looks like. So always keep that in mind and clearly define what the destination is going to be. So for instance, in this landscape, it might be to improve bobwhite quail habitat. It might be to increase production of the grass understory for our grazing or livestock operation. So we have to have a goal. Once you know the destination, you can start to develop a monitoring plan that will determine if you are on the right path. How long will you monitor and how often? There are short-term trends such as forage production and utilization of little blue stem on a one-time graze event, or there's long-term trends that you can capture, such as the percent of Yaupon holly canopy cover in the mid-story of a post-oak savanna. Knowing which ecological elements to specifically monitor will help you to settle on which tools would be the best to utilize. Things like structure, density, composition, utilization, frequency, production, cover. These are all elements that we need to be thinking about in our monitoring plans on which ones we want to capture. With a good plan and consistent monitoring in place, you can adjust management along the way to ensure that you're on the right path, or that your landscape is trending in the right direction relative to your goals, along with improving ecological functions. Hopefully your goals match improvement of ecological functions. So our first and often go-to tool is utilizing a frame. It's great for measuring production, utilization, frequency, structure. This is where we would randomly or systematically along a transect line throw a frame to get representative data across a management unit. You can then utilize the defined data to multiply out on a landscape scale. This is one of the main tools and components to be utilized in some of the other transect methods that we're going to discuss later in the presentation. Photo points. There's going to be some talks later in the day specifically about photo points, but I wanted to bring it up kind of a high bar level here. They are great for monitoring plant communities and soil surface composition over time, especially these up close photo points where you're trying to capture something specific. For instance, maybe there's a turkey that's nesting in the spring and you want to monitor the success of her nest. Or it could be that you're monitoring plant cover over a long period of time due to some management changes on the property. Landscape photo points. This is where a picture really is worth 1,000 words. You can monitor specific management effects. You can also capture long-term plant community changes over time. I would highly recommend the use of labeling your photos as you go. Oftentimes you'll have a whole database full of pictures and you don't know which transect line they came from. So take it from me by experience, always label your, take a whiteboard with you or a piece of paper and label your transects when you do them. Here's an example of utilizing a photo point with a producer we worked with over in Anderson County who wanted to improve his soil coverage on his pasture and his productivity for his grazing operation. So this was in the winter of 2017. We decided to implement a bale grazing enhancement across that pasture to get nutrient cycling, to get soil cover on that field, to hopefully stimulate some production from the seed bank or what might be in the hay. Here's a follow-up picture, that same field, that next summer. So you can see we really regenerated a lot of annual grasses on the site and got a lot of production from where we had fed hay across that field the winter before. And then here's the following spring. We planted a cover crop to get even more diversity and nutrient cycling on the pasture, as well as plant cover. You can see the productivity continues to increase on this site as we move forward. And we've captured all that with this very simple process of setting up a photo point. Some of our transects is what I'll speak on next. First is the step point method. This is a great tool for getting quick estimations of basal coverage on a field or to try to capture specific individual species. It's best suited for grasses, forbs, or short shrubs. It would not be as advantageous in a forest setting or really thick brush. But it involves making observations along a transect at a specified interval using a pin flag to record hits. You can quickly gather large amounts of information over a specific area. And then you will need someone to record your data while someone's calling out what species or bare ground that they're seeing along the transect. Double weight sampling. This is used when determining individual species production, and it also gives us the ability to compare back to what the historic plant community would have been. We can pull the ecological site description for the specific site that we're on, and we're able to easily compare and see how we're different from that historical context of the site. It involves clipping individual species. We use reference weights, and then we can quickly estimate that and across multiple frames. It captures variabilities of each production year as well as seasonality. However, several plots are needed to get useful information, to get accurate data, and also air drying of the plants is needed as well. So there are some limitations to this methodology as well. Here's an example of a reference community, an ecological site description that we can compare our double sampling method to. You can see we've got production values, we've got plant community composition there. So we can look at all of that as we reference our ecological site description. By knowing which site we're on, we can see, kind of get a direction in how we want to go and make management decisions based on that. Point intercept transect. This method is great for calculating canopy cover in a shrubland or a forest land. It's a highly repeatable method. You would use a pin flag or a sighting device along a set of transects, and you would be able to call out individual species on the line at a given mark or total coverage. species composition by cover type. So this is an incredibly useful transect methodology. In fact, this would be my go-to that I use the most often because it captures so much data for us in that one transect line. You can see in the picture a drone picture where we did a transect line with point intercept, and you can really easily see the bare ground relative to the clumps of little blue stem in that transect line that we're capturing that data. A belt transect is next. This is great for calculating population of specific plant species, especially brush encroachment or shrub encroachment on a field. So we'll use this one a lot when we're looking at mesquite seedlings or huisache as it's starting to invade a rangeland site. And this gives us an idea of how many trees per acre we have out there on a bigger scale now, because you're calculating it across the entire width of that rod that you would hold it at belt height and move across that transect line. You would walk the full length, recording plants that are rooted under the rod. And larger plot sizes provide for a larger amount of area that can be covered quickly relative to a point intercept. Pasture or grazing sticks. These are great for quick estimations of structure, production, utilization, heights of forage, specifically for a grazing system. They can be utilized to ensure that plant residual height goals are being met for a prescribed grazing plan. Exclusion cages. These are great for more precise measurements of utilization and production of a site with livestock and or wildlife pressure on the site. Other monitoring indicators that we look at are things like bite marks on forage and browse utilization by wildlife or livestock. Oftentimes we can set up browse surveys to see what might be the deer density of a site or which plants they're specifically using in on a season by season basis. Various range health indicators include litter dams, and that's going to be the picture on the far left, a representation of a litter dam. This shows us how much velocity and volume of water is moving across the site. The more plant cover, the less movement of litter across the site. But when we're seeing a lot of litter dams, that's kind of telling us there's a lot of bare ground out there. Water's moving, picking up that litter and moving it across the site. Plant pedestals, that's going to be the middle picture there. You can see we've got some soil erosion around that plant, and it's pedestaled that plant above the rest of the soil surface due to that erosion. That can tell us, that again, we need some plant coverage out there. It can tell us which direction we're going. Are we going down in trend? Are we going up in trend? These are little indicators we can utilize. Soil capping is also something we can look for. As you notice right next to the plant pedestal, there's some cracks in the ground there. We've got some soil capping issues occurring there. Water's not able to infiltrate that soil. It's just pooling and running off the site. So again, another indicator. We'd like to see the biological crust there on the far right picture start to develop in some of these bare ground areas. These are kind of the pioneers, if you will. They form a crust on top of the soil surface. They can be algae, lichens, moss, cyanobacteria. These are all what we would call biological crusts, and they will start to populate those bare ground sites and kind of they pave the way for that higher successional life to occur. Here's an example of a project where we kind of incorporated two different of these techniques. One, obviously, we've got some photo points. Here's a picture in 2022, and here's a picture in 2023, the year after. And in this, we've got a project where we're manipulating the basal area of a pine overstory by doing a pre-commercial thinning, and then we're going to follow up with burning to get even more diversity on the site. The reason we're doing this, the goal of the project, is to change the understory plant community to have more diversity for wildlife, specifically, this producer is interested in the eastern turkey habitat. And so that's what we're trying to do, is mimic what the historical plant community would have been. And so we've set this management in place, and these monitoring techniques are going to help us to see if we're achieving our goal, if we're going in the right direction. We also, along these photo points, these are transect line markers as well. And we've got a point intercept transect that we're going to do every year. We're going to do it annually, and we're going to monitor what's the difference in the overstory, mid-story, herbaceous level, and the ground cover level to see how these are changing across the time period of this project. Are we making the habitat better? Or are we going the wrong way? Do we need to recalculate? The monitoring is what allows us to see that. It's also very easy to get bogged down in monitoring or data collection. We once did a 3-year project where we sampled quarterly. We utilized 18 different tests and monitoring techniques, and we still haven't dug through all the data that we collected on that project. We had good aspirations and we were very zealous, but it became a burden is what it did. And I don't know that that data will ever be combed through with all of it that we did get. So with that in mind, I would say we need to maybe narrow our focus. What are the specific things that we should monitor out there on the landscape that's going to achieve our goal or help us to realize our goal? We need to make a realistic monitoring plan. We need to utilize the appropriate tools. Hopefully some of these will be helpful to you and your projects. And I'd also say that patience is the key. These things take time. Monitoring takes time. And oh yes, do not forget, make it fun. Oftentimes these are some of the funnest days at my job is when we get to all go out there together, out there in the land and monitor how is our management having an effect on the landscape. So if NRCS can ever help in any way, if I can ever help anybody in any way, please feel free to contact me. Again, I'm Brandon Bing, grazing specialist in Palestine, Texas. If you're in my area, give me a shout. But there's also NRCS offices across the entire state of Texas that can help you to achieve your management goals and get you set up with the right monitoring plan for your property. And that's all I have. If I can be of help in any way, or the NRCS can be of any help in your counties, that's what we're here for. We can teach you some of these methods, and we'd be happy to help. Just give us a call. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon, for the presentation. That was great. We're going to roll right into our second presentation. Next up will be Dan Gaskins with the Texas A&M Forest Service. Dan is a Society of American Foresters certified forester. He has worked as a staff forester in the Forestry Inventory and Analysis Program since 2014 and currently works in Kerrville, Texas. We'll turn it over to you, Dan, to tell us about understanding forestry, prisms, and plots.
Okay, like I said, I'm Dan Gaskins with the Texas A&M Forest Service, and we've been asked to talk today a little bit about forestry plots and how we measure trees for monitoring, and also get into prisms a little bit. When we're measuring our forest plots, we kind of have to keep in mind what we want and then where we can get, how we can get that information. So in a more commercial sense, a lot of times we want timber volume. We want to know how much wood we have out there in the forest that can be turned into wood. We also may be interested in stand composition and forest health, but how we get those things has to come from variables that we can actually measure. So one of the things we base a lot of stuff on is diameter, which DBH is something you'll hear in forestry a lot. Diameter at breast height, that's just at 4.5 feet off the ground. Length is also our other main measurement. That's total length sometimes, but also it may be what we call merchantable length, which is how far up the tree is it of an appropriate size or shape to be turned into a wood product. And that's going to depend entirely on the mill that the wood might be going to and what the products that mill is at. And it's going to vary quite a bit. And then basal area is another factor that we're going to talk about here in a minute that you can get from diameter, but there's other ways to get it as well. We might also be interested in the various ways of looking at the way the crown is structured, or how much light is reaching the forest floor. And then we'd also be on the lookout for invasive species and other things like that, maybe insect factors, or the trees being attacked by beetles, things like that. So to get to volume, diameter, length, and area are kind of the main things we need, because as you know, volume would be an area times another dimension, right? So that would be how we're going to get there is from our area to times how long that tree is. So just kind of real quickly going through some of these things, we typically measure diameter with, this is called a logger's tape, or you can use just a regular diameter tape. And that's a tape that has been calibrated. If you look at this top line right here, when you wrap something around a circle, you're actually measuring circumference. But this is a tool that converts that into diameter, and that's how we measure diameter of trees. Length, there's lots of different tools we can use to get that. From low tech as low as a carpenter's tape measure. That's mostly what we use out here in the western part of the state. I'm based here in Kerrville. Our trees aren't that tall, so we can normally push tape up it. Clinometers can be used, and then there's fancy expensive toys like this hypsometer here that we can also use. There's a variety of ways of measuring length. I'm not going to get super into the weeds on that today, but that's also going to be an important variable. Crown and light, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, and it's going to depend on what your goals are, but this is one of the most common tools for looking at that, and it's called a densitometer. And basically it's just a mirror that has a grid on it, and you count how many grid points either do or don't have crown canopy covering it, and that can give you a % canopy coverage. But the main thing I want to talk about today, because I've been asked to talk about prisms, is basal area. And this is something that maybe you might not have heard as much about, depending on your background. So basal area is the cross-sectional area of trees at breast height, so 4.5 feet. You can calculate this from DBH on each tree. So if you know the diameter, you can calculate the area. But you can also use a prism to estimate it more quickly. And it is a good descriptor of stand density, both overall, and you can also break it down by species. And then we use this area to calculate how much merchantable volume we have. This is also how you're going to get to biomass as well. So you can derive this formula, but generally as foresters, we just use the number 0.005454. That's derived from pi r squared and all that. Basically, this formula, if you put in diameter at breast height in inches and multiply it by that number, you will get the basal area of that tree in square feet. And then you can extrapolate out all those other things as well. So that's what basal area is. So prisms are just like any other prism, but in forestry specifically, it's a glass, it's a piece of glass that's been ground to a specific shape that's going to refract the light in a particular way, that's met in a particularly calibrated way to give us a basal area factor. And you can get factor prisms from 4 up to, I believe there's 25. 10 is a pretty standard basal area factor prism. And we're going to get into what that means, but they come in a few different shapes. These are kind of just some of the general shapes. This, what forestry suppliers calls a custom shape, is kind of the most common one I've seen used, but I know the others get used as well, depending on the situations. And then they have a corresponding, what we call a plot radius factor, or PRF. So we're going to get into that too. So the way it works is when you hold this prism over plot center, and then you line it up to make sure that you're at the right perpendicular to the growth of the tree, and then you correct for slope and all that. It's going to refract the light so that that tree appears to have a middle section of it shifted to one side. So here on the left, we see a tree where it's been shifted, and that tree still overlaps. The part that's been shifted still overlaps the main bole of the tree. Okay. We're going to consider that tree in on our plot. The middle example, it's hard to tell if it overlaps or it just perfectly lines up. We're going to consider that a borderline tree. And we're coming back to all of these in just a second. And then on the far right, you can see it clearly doesn't overlap it at all. And that's what we're going to call an out tree. Okay. So this is what it looks like through an actual prism on an actual tree. You can see that the way that shifts to the left. So here we've got, on top, we've got an in tree. In the middle, we've got a borderline tree. And on the bottom, we've got an out tree. And these come from Alabama Extension has a really nice little handout on prism cruising. It's their FOR-2062 is where I pulled these from. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about prisms, that's a great resource. They have a really good little blog post and a printout about that too. So we use these prisms for something we call a variable radius plot. So whether or not the tree is in or out, which the prism will determine for us, right, with that shift, is dependent on how big the tree is. So that basal area or that PRF is what gives it the plot radius factor, gives us a limiting distance. So a larger tree can be farther away and still be an in tree because it has to shift over farther to be no longer overlapping, right? So just for example, a 10 BAF prism has a plot radius factor of 2.75. A 9-inch tree 20 feet away is an in tree. 25 feet would be out because that's the limiting distance is 24.75 feet. So whereas a 10-inch tree at 25 feet would still be in. So that's how you calculate limiting distance. And we use that for those borderline trees, right? So if a tree is clearly in, it's in, and then we're going to tally it. If it's borderline, we're going to check its distance from the center of our plot against that limiting distance. And a lot of people who are cruising this way will actually carry a little printout chart of just some limiting distances for various diameters so that they don't have to sit and actually calculate this. But we all carry calculators in our pockets now, and it's much easier. So from this, that BAF, the basal area factor, if we multiply the number of trees that are in on our plot by the BAF of the prism, we'll get basal area in square feet per acre. Okay, so if we have 7 trees that are in on our plot, for where that plot falls, we have if I said 7, we have 70 square feet per acre of basal area. Okay, and this is just another diagram that kind of shows that this 14-inch tree can be 38.5 feet away, while a 6-inch tree can only be 16.5 feet away. Okay, the other kind of forest plot we can do is called a fixed radius plot, where we have a set distance from the center of our plot that is in or out. So we can have a set rate plot radius. To get basal area from this type of plot, you calculate it for each individual tree, and then you add them up to get the basal area for the subplot and then per acre. One of the things that we can get from this that we can't get from variable radius plots is we know what our sample area is, so we can actually do statistics on our intensity, right? So we know that if we're doing a 10th acre plot, how many 10th acre plots it takes to do a 10% cruise. So for example, if we have a 10-acre stand that we want to do a 10% cruise of, so we're going to measure 10% of the surface area of that stand, we need 10 10th acre plots to get a 10% cruise. So we can do a little bit more statistical analysis with this fixed radius plot. So there are benefits and downsides to both. Fixed radius plots, the literature says it's harder to do with one person, and that is sort of true because you are going to be measuring out the distance to more trees as opposed to just the borderline trees. I put an asterisk on both of these because it varies from plot to plot. You can do fixed radius plots by yourself. There are tools out there now that make that easier. Fixed radius does work with any stand size, whereas variable radius works better in larger diameter stands because you're going to have more trees in the plot, so you're going to get more data. But variable radius directly gives you basal area quite quickly. So if basal area is what you're mostly interested in, variable radius plots might be more in your what you're looking for. It can be a challenge. You're having to very precisely measure those borderline trees to see if they're in or out, because it can be down to decimals of a foot. Whereas on a fixed radius plot, you pull out to the edge of your plot and that's it, right? It's either in or it's out. Also, variable radius plots, you have to be able to clearly see the tree. And so if it's a thick understory or there's a lot of vines or anything like that, it can be a challenge. Another interesting thing you can do with these prism cruises, though, on these variable radius plots, is if you want to thin your stand to a specific basal area, and you're going through a marking for your thinning, you can use a prism to figure out how many of those trees you need to leave and how many you need to take out to get to a specific basal area. And you can do that as you're going through. So it is very useful for that as well. So just real quickly, I wanted to get into the forest inventory and analysis program. This is what I do for the Texas Forest Service. It's a national forest inventory that was established back in 1928. And then the 1998 Farm Bill did modify it. We went from a periodic national forest survey to now what we do is we do a rolling annual, we do a percentage of our plots every year. So we do fixed radius plots, not variable radius. And there's one of these about every 3 miles. At least that's the density here in Texas. It may be a little different across the country, but the U.S. Forest Service is who administers this program. And then we take the measurements here in Texas. Across the country, we're all using more or less the same methodology. We have a manual that we all have to be trained on. And so you can compare our data here in Texas to the data from North Carolina, Oregon, Puerto Rico, Alaska, and you can compare that data apples to apples because we're using the same methods. And then this data is freely available to the public if anybody wants to do work with it. If you go to a Society of American Foresters conference, if you walk through the poster section, a lot of them are using our data because it's freely available and it's very high quality data. So this is sort of what that looks like. We do in East Texas every 5 years. In West Texas, we do every 10 years. We come to each plot. So we do either 10 or 20% of the plots in each county each year. And you can see that they're also, we don't do them all in one part. They're distributed across the county. And so by the end of that cycle, we've covered a good portion of the county, but you can also see that each of these plots represents a pretty large area. So they're not able to zoom down real small in like a stand level. This is more region level, county level data, strategic level data. We have offices all over the state. I am running a little bit short on time here, but we're kind of spread out all over the place. Texas is a big state, and it takes a lot of us to collect this data. So if you're a landowner, you may get a call from someone from the Texas Forest Service wants to come measure your trees, and you have a ranch somewhere outside San Angelo. Well, that's us, and there are actually trees, and it does actually have value. The Texas Forest Info website is a great resource where a lot of this data feeds into these apps we have out for the public. So if you're not familiar with that, that's a great place to go see what some of this data goes into. The timber supply analysis is another thing the Southern Group of State Foresters puts out that uses our data. And this data combined with this sort of usage has brought billions with a B dollars of investment into the forest sector here in Texas. So it is very valuable. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. No, that was great. Appreciate your time and sharing with us today.
So everybody, since 2010, Megan has been Extension Rangeland Specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Department of Rangeland, Wildlife, and Fisheries Management at Texas A&M University. Her responsibilities as a rangeland specialist have her based at the Uvalde Research and Extension Center and include providing support for extension agents, specialists, clientele, and organizations through teaching, training, and providing technical expertise on the management of rangeland resources. Megan, take it away.
Thank you, Charles. I thought about just submitting a really long bio, so he had to read that, but that was long enough. All right, so I'm excited today to talk to you about using photo points efficiently. I know Brandon touched on photo points earlier, but we're going to take a little bit of a dive deeper into that, how we can document land changes over time, because no matter what type of project you're working on, or no matter how many acres you have, photo points can be incredibly impactful and help you to make better management decisions in the future. So first of all, why would land change? Well, obviously, a lot of us have seen it change either because of weather conditions, because of different seasons that we move through, due to brush encroachment, management practices that maybe have been applied either naturally through weather conditions or maybe man applied practices. And then, of course, different grazing pressure, not only from livestock, but also the grazing pressure that's put onto them from wildlife species can drastically change the way our plant communities are responding and the way they change over time. So it's really kind of an incredible study to be able to document something that occurs naturally in our environment. So this is my example for why I would advocate for annual photos, which is documenting the long-term monitoring of that property. So we're going to talk about short-term monitoring here in just a second. But when we're doing long-term monitoring or annual photographs, I think it's very important. And a lot of times people tell me, I'm out here every day. I don't really need a photograph to document it because I see the changes and I know what's going on. And I agree with that to an extent. But I know that I had this dog, Lila. Before I had children, Lila was my baby, right? Many of you probably have a dog or an animal that's special to you like that. Lila, I got when I was in college. And after I started in the position I'm in now, I had a friend from college come to visit. And when he rang the doorbell and I opened the door, hadn't seen him in a long time, the first thing out of his mouth was, wow, Lila got fat. And I can tell you that I was a little bit ticked off, thinking maybe I should just shut the door and uninvite this friend to visit. But you know what? After some time, I had seen some pictures of her from when she was younger and pictures when she was older. And you know what? In 15 and a half years, Lila did get fat. And I didn't see it because I saw Lila every day. And so these changes occur very subtly, and sometimes we don't really take note of them. And that is exactly the reason that I would advocate for taking annual photos of your land. You think that you're going to remember how different weather events happen throughout the years, or how your plant communities responded differently one year to the next, or maybe there was a certain weed that took over one year, but maybe a different weed that took over the next. These things are things we think that we're going to burn into our memory, but not necessarily. And photos are a way to help us remember how those things changed in order to make the best management decisions moving forward. So like it says at the bottom of the screen here, annual photos, but they work well for just kind of general range conditions in the health of our property or the health of our dog. So these things are going to help us document exactly what's been going on. Now, seasonal photos, those are short-term monitoring. And sometimes we can actually get more dramatic photos by taking seasonal photos. And so I think they're very exciting too. These would show different pressures from stocking rates. Maybe you've lessened up the number of livestock you have on the property, or you found a way to reduce the number of wildlife species who are constantly eating on the vegetation in there. There's changes in standing forage crop, either through weather or through rotational practices that you might be doing on the property, and then responses to weed and brush management. So if you've made any effort into applying management onto your property, it is a must that you follow those up, or start those and then follow those up with seasonal photos, because that's going to document the change and make sure that what changes you're seeing are aligning with your goals for that property. So really exciting to be able to take seasonal photos to kind of track those short-term changes over time. So when would you take photos? So annual photos by name, obviously, you're going to take those annually. So at least once a year. And a lot of times people decide to take them in the fall before frost, because if you think about it, when spring green up happens and the different patterns of our rainfall may vary as things get going, but a lot of times the fall right before we're going into the winter dormant season stays a little bit more consistent. And so whenever you take your photo, the important thing is to make sure that you're taking them at the same time every year so that your pictures can be compared apples to apples. The other thing is, if we're taking seasonal or these short-term photos, we may want to take them at different seasons, like late winter, spring green up, midsummer time, like right now at frost. And then, of course, if you're grazing your property, it's great to take it before the animals come into a pasture and after they leave a pasture. That can help you to keep records on if you're moving them at the appropriate time. And then, of course, if you're controlling brush or weeds on your property or an invasive grass, it would be great to take pictures before you do the practice and afterwards to note how that responded. So when we talk about location or the number of photos that you should take, this is variable. So hang with me here, because this is kind of the key. Because if we put too many photo points on ourselves, a lot of times that becomes a burden instead of an exciting venture to get really cool data over time. And so it's going to be important that you do the number of photo points that you can handle. And sometimes having one photo point is a heck of a lot better than none. And so if that's all you can take on, then that's perfect. What's suggested is anywhere from 2 to 5 photo points within an ecological site. So the NRCS folks on here can help you find the ecological sites on your property through Web Soil Survey, or you can go to Web Soil Survey directly on your own. Work through making a soil map of your property, which I would highly encourage if you've never done that. And then you can go to a tab that will take you to the ecological sites and tell you more information than you probably ever wanted to know about your plant communities and how they can change over time. And you may be seeing those changes over time in the photographs that you're taking. So you might be able to over time match up your photographs with what they're showing for those successional changes throughout the times. What we would suggest is you look at your property and you pick out those areas that are similar, and you're going to do 2 to 5 photo points per area. That way, you know that you're covering the gamut of things that you have on your land. The other thing to make sure is that where you put your photo points are easily accessible. So though we want to spread them out where they make sense and they're showing very representative areas of our land, we also definitely don't want them to be in an area where we have to walk a great distance or they're hard to get to, because then you will be least likely to take those photographs when the time comes around. So avoid areas close to water where they may be more heavily used by livestock and wildlife. Avoid areas maybe in the back of the pasture where a lot of times you don't see a lot of activity. But you might need to add on additional photos from time to time that might show erosion if you see an area of concern, or maybe you have a wildfire, or maybe you do a prescribed fire and you want to add additional photos. Always free to add more, but do come up with some that are kind of set points that you're going to take these photographs from on a regular basis. So how would you set up a point? Once you decide kind of where your area is that you're going to consider one ecological site or one range area, you're going to set out some points that are easy to get to and representative. And then you're going to go to those locations and you're either going to put a T-post in the ground, or if that is simply impossible because of the type of soils or rock that you have, consider using rebar instead. We're going to want to mark these things in some way. So I can't tell you how many times I've been on properties and there are random T-posts, or I'll put out some research on a property and my T-posts are removed because somebody just thought they were extra T-posts up for grabs and they needed them to fix a fence. So what I've started doing is slipping a PVC pipe over those T-posts, and that makes them much more visible. And it tells people that, hey, this post is probably there for some reason, but you can imagine a big white beacon in the field is a whole lot easier to see than a green T-post. Some people like to spray paint either T-post or rebar. Personally, my paint always comes off, so I don't know if I'm doing the wrong thing or using the wrong paint, but I have not had good luck long-term with paint. But if you regularly repaint those things, that might be a good way to keep those identified. And then, of course, GPS them. And this does not mean that you have to have a fancy GPS. If nothing else, I do this all the time. Pull up Google Maps. You're going to zoom into your location. Wait until that point kind of levels out to where it's in the right spot. Make sure it looks like it's in the right position on your map. And then you're going to hold your finger down right on that point. And that's going to pop up some lat long coordinates for you to write down that will document where that is. So the next time you need to go to that location, you're going to pull up Google Maps and instead of an address, you'll type in your lat long numbers. and it'll take you really close to where at least you're close enough to see your T-post. So another great way to actually permanently mark that place. And then it's nice if you have a map of your location. So if nothing else, draw them on with a permanent marker where these different photo points are located so you can get back to them. On a piece of paper, you're going to put the plot name, if you have a name for it, the pasture name, what number that plot is, and the date or any specific information that kind of identifies that site for you. And then you're going to want to take a piece of, you're going to take that paper in your picture or take it before you take the rest of your pictures so you can kind of identify where you took them from. We found that it's best to use a yellow pad of paper instead of a white piece of paper because a yellow pad is just easier to see later on, less glare, easier to read the words on it. So there's two types of photos that you're going to be taking: a vertical photo up and down, right on the ground, and one a scenic photo. So a vertical photo, you might put a couple of rebar in the ground, and that way there's a permanent location. But I like to just buy PVC pipe and buy some right corners to put in the corners of that to create a 3 by 3 foot frame. If you're a welder, you could weld yourself a 3 foot by 3 foot frame, but the white PVC makes for a nice outline in the photos. You'll lay that down to where the rebar is in the corners of your frame. And that's the site that you're always going to take your photograph straight down at the ground in. These vertical photos can tell us a lot about soil or litter or vegetation in the area and how that's changed over time, but it's a little bit limited because we're just taking a very small snapshot of a very huge area that it's representative of. So keep that in mind too. The scenic photos are neat because you're going to take a photograph from like the top of your T-bar or from your T-post or at chest height in each cardinal direction, and always take them north, south, east, west. That way you know what order your pictures are in for sure. And you're going to want to put the bottom of that photograph about 10 feet away from your post. That way you have a consistent place that you're taking the photograph from to make the background match up. So use the compass in your phone or take an actual compass and do north, south, east, and west. And that will give you a really great visual of how that area around the photo point looked at that time. The scenic photographs are telling us a lot about the general landscape, of course, but brush changes over time, especially if you're doing some management, the terrain, and then of course, soil. So how your soil is changing over time, you can see too. So a lot of times, even the vertical photo, but also the scenic photos will tell us a lot about kind of the pedestaling of plants, where plants are kind of set up on the soil because the soil has eroded from around them. You'll be able to see a lot of those features even in your scenic photos. And finally, key points, things that we're looking for. Download the photos to a folder right away. This is my downfall. I take a lot of really great photos and then I forget to download them and put them in the folder and label them neatly. And so they're essentially ineffective, right? You've got to go back right away and put them in a known folder. That way you have that photo for all eternity in that spot. You know where to find it. And it's labeled so that you remember you did north, south, east, and west in that order from that specific location. Another thought is to put, save the actual photographs, but also put the photos into either a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document to where you can scroll through there and see those changes over time. That's very impactful to have them all together in one place. Or if you like to look at a book, you could, of course, print out these photographs and put them into a book, but make sure that you put your data observation sheet with it. So let's talk a bit about the data observation sheet. So these sheets are going to help track the plant species you see, grazing regimes, any concerns that you have while you're out there, and then also practices completed or your rainfall. So all these notes that you take along with that photograph are going to be incredibly important for kind of setting the stage for what's happening in that photo or why you might be seeing it at a certain time. So when you go back 8 years later, you're like, wow, it looks really green, tall grasses at this time. And you can see in your notes, well, you received, extra bit of rainfall than what you normally get by that time in the year. And then of course, put in your calendar the dates for the next photo event. I do that after I take the photos, then I add the next date in. So I always remember to keep up with the photographs in a timely manner. And then you're looking for, when you look at these photos over time, You're looking for changes in cover or the density of desirable or maybe undesirable, it's easier, vegetation, the amount of litter that you have on the ground, different things that would lead you to choose different management practices or continue with the management practices that you're already applying to that property. You can look in changes of visible bare ground, which we know is a negative for rangelands, because where you have bare ground, you're likely going to have a lot of weed seeds coming up. You're also going to have the ability for those parts of your property to erode the soil away more quickly. And then you're looking for those evidences of erosion, like we talked about, like the pedestaled plants, or where you can visually see that a reel or something is being created. So those are the key points to creating nice photo points and having them usable and efficient for managing properties and making decisions based on them. Here's my email address, megan.clayton@ag.tamu.edu, if you have any questions about that. And I'll turn it back over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Megan. That was great. Really good discussion there. Next up, we have Erica Sullivan, who will speak on navigating the Rangeland Analysis Platform, or the RAP. Hopefully she won't break into a rap during the presentation, but Erica is from Ocala, Texas, and a recent MS graduate from Texas A&M University. Her graduate research consisted of hosting workshops for various age groups and demographics over this exact thing, the Rangeland Analysis Platform, and teaching about the importance of prescribed fire, multi-species grazing, pyrrhic herbivory, and managing woody plant encroachment. And now Erica currently works as a Landvisor range agronomist at Corteva AgriScience, where her primary goal is to combine herbicides with technology to effectively spray and kill honey mesquite. Welcome to the Plant Party, Erica. I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, again, I'm so happy to be here with all of y'all this morning. I feel like this talk ties in really well to Dr. Clayton's talk. But with that, I've got 15 minutes, so let's go ahead and get into it. So kind of my general overview for my talk is we're going to talk about what the Rangeland Analysis Platform is. I'll go through a short tutorial, and then if we have time, I'll kind of discuss some of the resources, fact sheets, and publications. All right, so a little bit about the platform in general. Is developed as a collaboration between the USDA, NRCS, BLM, and University of Montana. What's really interesting about it is that it combines satellite imagery with thousands of on-the-ground vegetation measurements collected by BLM, NPS, and the NRCS. It uses the power of cloud-based computing, very similar to how Google Earth uses that as well as machine learning technology, which allows the RAP to easily map vegetation across the United States. So if you're a landowner, rancher, somebody who's thinking about buying property, I just want to say this is a great tool that you can add to your toolbox to really look at the annual changes in cover and biomass, make sure you can actually see the impact of your land management decisions, or actually see if you want to buy a piece of property, depending on how it looks, just based on that sort of data. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch over tabs. We are actually going to get techie now. So I'm going to type into a new tab, rangelands.app. And this is going to take me to the main page that we're going to be interacting with today. And so I'm going to click on Launch RAP Next. And it should pull up a nice map of Northern America here. So the RAP just works with Northern America, which should be an issue. I think most of us are living in Northern America. But with that, I'm going to turn this switch off from here, but we're going to kind of walk through some of the tools and features so that way you can come out of this talk knowing how to use the platform for yourself. So we are currently in map mode. If I can direct your attention to the upper left corner here. As you can see, it's looking pretty blank right now. So if we want to actually add a little bit of topography, some more features, we can put it into satellite mode. Now, there we go. And so next thing I want to direct you to, well, we're going to have to look up a location. And so I'll type in a location here in a second, but If you happen to have a shapefile of your ranch, you can also upload that into the rangeland analysis platform itself, and the map will automatically direct you towards where that pasture is. But for keeping it simple, I'm just going to type in a good example area. So I'm going to put in Bastrop, Texas. And so many of y'all are familiar with the drought and fires that we had in 2011 and 2012. And I'm going to show you what the satellite imagery can tell us from around that time period. And so I'm going to go back to the map layers window here to the left. And let's walk through a couple of these different tools here. So we've got cover first. And so if we click on this little information tab here, so what is cover? Well, it's the percent cover of annual forbs and grasses, perennial forbs and grasses, shrub, trees, and bare ground. So these are all the different categories in the cover type that we can look at. And it's all at a 30-meter resolution, which I believe is about the size of a baseball diamond, which that's about as accurate as it can get. If you're interested in looking at how they're getting this information, what kind of math calculations are they doing in order to provide this sort of data, and also what's the actual error of, the cover and biomass in this case, how accurate is this technology? Just click on more information here and it'll take you to a separate page where you can read as much or as little on that as you want to. All right, so let's go ahead and start get a little bit interesting here. Let's turn on the cover switch here. As you can see, it's the default is perennial forb and grass in this case. So I'll keep it on there, but we can toggle through these different categories. But right next to the perennial forb and grass, we have a little saturation marker here. So you can, lighten it up, darken it up if you're trying to see the terrain better, that sort of thing. Right below, it tells us what the percent cover is for, a designated area. So the darker green, it's going to mean, a denser accumulation of that different cover type. And so here's where we can actually analyze the data throughout the years. And so what's cool about the RAP is it is providing us data all the way back to 1986. Now, I'm not going to go back that far. I'm more interested in the time period from 2010 to 2012. And so going through these years, I'm just going to click through. So this is what 2010 looks like, just looking at this visually. I'm going to take a look at 2011 next. You can see I can't really tell much change here, maybe a little bit lighter in this case. And I'm going to take a look at 2012. Okay, so now we can kind of see how the map, tells us, or how it shows us with these different colors, how perennial forb and grass is changing. And so we can do the same thing for tree cover in this case. So if we look back at 2010, we see it's pretty dense, right? 2011, I can see that it kind of thinned up some more in different areas. And then 2012, maybe it kind of thinned up even more so. And so that's really interesting to look at, really informative there. I feel like I can get a lot of information, at least just visually, for this area. All right, so that is cover. Let's go ahead and take a look at biomass. And so if you're a rancher, I hope you're getting excited because this has all to deal with the pounds per acre, the forage productivity of your ranch. And so with biomass, what the RAP tells us is it's the annual accumulation of new above ground biomass for annual forbs and grasses, perennial forbs and grasses, and herbaceous, which is just the annual and perennial combined at a 30-meter resolution. Just like cover, you can get more information on how they're, whipping out these different percentages and things. And so I'm going to keep it on herbaceous. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. And let's go back to that time frame that we had set. So if we go to 2010, you see what that looks like there. You got 2011. I can see, I don't know about y'all, but I can see it lightened up dramatically around the Bastrop area during this time. And then 2012. and it kind of got dark a little bit again. And so just like with cover type, we can adjust saturation, we can adjust the years. And then again, this bar down here is telling us, you know, how much pounds per acre do we have in this area. And so I know it's a broad area right now, but let's go ahead and get a more defined area in this case. And so if I want to pick a pasture or draw out a pasture, I am able to do so in the wrap. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go down to the Draw Features button here. I'm going to go back up. And so there's a little hand grabby tool up here. And there's also a Draw a Shape tool up here. There's also some marker tools and a draw line tool. I never really use those. I'm always using the Draw a Shape tool in this case. And so I'm going to zoom back in again. I'm going to find an area that I like. Not too much tree, maybe some grass. Let's do this area right here. I'm going to outline this area. So I'm just right-hand clicking on my screen to form this polygon. And I'm going to enclose this shape by clicking on the first dot that I have. All right, so I'm going to move this window back up. So now we should see another window appear. So right now, this is showing me cover data, but in graphical form. And so you can get, or at least for me, I can see a lot more data just based on this graph. And so if you want to enlarge this graph, if you go right below the CSV Excel print button, there'll be another little window we can open. And so now it's showing us all the way back from 1986 to 2023, what are the changes in cover types over time. And so we can kind of move our little mouse around. And so we can see around 2010, 2011, we can see for sure precipitation went down immensely. And if we look at tree cover up here, which is the line outlined in orange, we can see that from 2010, 2011, 2012, this decreased dramatically. And so this is just something else that, you know, you can take a screenshot of this, put this in presentations, hold on to it for yourself just to see the impacts, you know, of the impacts that have been occurring on this land. Now, if you were just interested in looking at tree cover, something else you can do is you can click on these, click on the shrub cover, perennial forbin grass, annual forbin grass, bare ground down below, and you can just focus on tree cover and annual precipitation and, you know, copy paste that data wherever you would like. But this feature is really cool. So if you're not a big fan of graph data and you want to download this instead as numbers on an Excel or CSV, for me, I use Google for everything. So I believe you can still upload Excel and CSV into Google. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Excel and it should download a file for me. So I'm going to open it up. So what will happen once you download that Excel data is it'll pull everything together. So we have by year again, 1986, 2023, and then we have all the different cover types up above. So AFG is just short-term, annual forbin grass, and then from so on, perennial forbin grass, shrub, tree, litter, bare ground. So I'm looking at, you know, the 2011 data in this case. I'm kind of moving my mouse around here, but from 2010 to 2012, you can see that tree cover, you know, dramatically decreased during this time. It's very valuable information. And so these percentages that it's pulling is just for that area that I outlined, that pasture. But all right, let me go ahead and switch my screen back. Okay, so next thing I'm going to look at is annual biomass. So just like cover, we can take a look at the annual biomass of an area. And so I'm going to open back up this screen again, enlarge this, so we can see the impacts of annual forbin grass, perennial forbin grass, and herbaceous biomass. So annual forbin grass, it's kind of stayed pretty low over the years. We can see that herbaceous biomass, perennial forb and grass biomass. It took a beating during the time of 2011, but it came back up rapidly after 2012, which I think that was around the time that the fire took place. My Texas Master Naturalist folks, I think most of us know this, but after fire hits an area, that grass is going to come back real quick. Grass loves fire. So that's just really cool to see. That's something that I would definitely use for a presentation on just the impacts of fire. Really cool stuff. Okay, and so the last thing I want to show y'all here is the 16-day biomass. And so this is the most current up-to-date data that you can actually pull from the Rangeland Analysis platform. And so I'm going to enlarge this again. As you can see, this is for 2024, so it's already tracking. If I hover my mouse over these different lines, so every 16 days, so we've got 217, 304, it's pulling in those biomass estimates for this year. And so at least for this area, it's nothing really significant or standing out to me currently. But we can go back in time, go take a look at 2011, 2012. We can see that there's quite a bit of a jump from 2011, 2012 on these 16-day estimates. It's just really interesting to see. Okay. And so I'm going to go back to the home page. I'm not sure how much time I have left. I won't be able to cover this feature, but something else that I wanted to mention is if you want to look or have a deeper dive into the historical production, current year production, and stocking rate, the Rangeland Analysis platform has a Launch Production Explorer tool, which all you have to do is, so we've opened up the Production Explorer tool. We can select an import method. So you can either upload a shapefile if you have one, or you can draw a feature like we did back on that map layers window. You'll have to draw it again. But you can set the analysis period. So if you're only interested in, from 2022 to 2023, what those numbers look like, just make sure that you set the analysis period for that date. So you don't get confused, because once you set in these dates, it's going to be, those are the dates that you're going to use to look at your current year production, your historical production, as well as your stocking rate. And so with that, so another great tool to add to your toolbox. Let me go back to my slide here. Before I get back onto resources and stuff, so again, this is a really great tool. One thing I want to mention is this should always be paired with, boots on the ground, observation. Like, I wouldn't solely rely on the Rangeland Analysis platform to, make all the management decisions for you. I would definitely, pair it with, your own observation of what's going on your land. Maybe use some line point observation methods, or throw out some belt transects, just so you have that abundance of data and make the best decision possible that you can for your land. And so this, what I want to move on to next is so resources. But if you really are set on using the Rangeland Analysis platform, they provide user guides to help you navigate the platform and where they're pulling all their data from. They have a YouTube channel to also help with that same fact. And I created my own YouTube video just so people could figure out how to make a shapefile the easy way with no ArcGIS required. I'm definitely not a pro at using ArcGIS, so I've figured out a little hack, if that makes sense, a free hack, I promise, for creating a shapefile that can easily be uploaded into the Rangeland Analysis platform. There's a couple fact sheets and publications I wanted to talk about. So if you have, or if you want to, do a little assignment for yourself, just to learn about the Rangeland Analysis platform and use some demonstration ranches. So there's curriculum that's available that teaches about the Rangeland Analysis platform that I'm a co-author on. And I've also got a fact sheet out there that just talks about how to navigate the RAP in general. But with that, go ahead and end my talk there.
Thank you, Erica. That was really excellent. I can't wait to go play around with that some more. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles to introduce our final speaker.
All right, thanks, Megan. So we're ready to get started with the last presentation, and our final speaker, Ryan Nagelkirk, is with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. As part of his undergraduate and graduate education at Michigan State University, Ryan participated in research focusing on the application of drones and remote sensing in precision agriculture and woody encroachment in savanna ecosystems. As a Texas State GIS specialist in the NRCS, Ryan has focused on incorporating digital elevation models and canopy height models into field assessments, along with researching the potential applications of drones. Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us about the future of monitoring.
All right. Thank you, Charles. So I'll talk briefly about kind of where we are with plant observations and then where we might go in the future. It's not a whole lot of time to cover this sort of thing, but that's kind of nice because I can keep it at kind of a fun, high level without getting into all the dirty details of these sorts of things. And I do want to preface that what I'm going to show you makes it all look really simple, but right now we're in the stages of overcoming some of the challenges of applying these things at scale. So you're not going to see it anytime too soon, but we'll get more into that here in a second. So yeah, overview, I'll talk about some of the current use cases of technology and vegetation monitoring, and then where that might go in the future. Currently, we've heard a lot today about surveys on the ground, and so I'm not going to cover any more of that, but basically we're kind of taking some of those same approaches and trying to apply them to large areas using satellite imagery and then aerial remote sensing, along with a few other things I'll get into. But the two major things that maybe you've seen some of is using LiDAR and then spectral analysis from imagery. And so we'll cover those two things. And LiDAR, first of all, is light detection and ranging. How this is typically done is from an airplane that flies over a landscape and is firing a laser down at hundreds or thousands of times per second and measuring whatever it hits on the ground, the elevation of it. And so it times the amount of time, or it tracks the amount of time it takes for the laser to come down, hit an object, and come back up. And so from that time, and it can calculate the distance away. And if you know the distance, you can place that thing in space where it is. And so essentially you're collecting like GPS points for all these different points on canopies and on the ground below you. And that is, I mean, it's amazing data. It's kind of like if you went out into the field and used a GPS and went all over a tree and took the GPS position in all these different locations, you're getting millions or billions of these measurements in one of these transects that they do. And what you can do with that then is create a few different products. You could create what we call a digital surface model, or a DSM, where you're looking at the elevation of just the highest things on the landscape. And so in this case, it's on this little bush, and then it's a tree. In some of these places, the highest thing between bushes would be the ground. You can create a digital terrain model, or also called digital elevation model. And you've probably seen these at least in things like Google Earth or Google Maps, where they have some sort of shape to the landscape. Those are all digital elevation models where they ignore the vegetation and just get the ground surface. This is also very useful for engineering or anything where you need to know the shape of the land and the elevation around you. And typically that's around 1 meter resolution. So for every square meter on the ground, you have one elevation point. And then something we're getting into more nowadays is instead of using the ground surface, we're also using the vegetation surfaces, or what we call here the canopy height model. And this could include trees and bushes, but also even grass in some areas. You can get the elevation of that canopy as well. And So we don't need to get too much into the details of this, but essentially if you take this product and subtract that one, that's how you get this. And what's nice about it is it ignores any kind of shape of the land below, and you just have the elevation or the height of the vegetation. And so on your property, you could look at the height of your trees in different areas, and you could compare that, let's say, across time. You could also look at the amount of cover that's on your land. And currently I have about half of Texas covered with that data, and I'm trying to compile as much of it as we can because it's kind of been an afterthought in a lot of these products. The main thing we've been trying to get at in time is the elevation products for the land surface, and these points were ignored, but we're incorporating those more and more now. So here's what you do with a digital elevation model. This is just that bare land surface with all the bridges and everything removed that's above the ground, scrape all that off and just look at the ground surface itself. And this is what a canopy height model looks like. And so everything that doesn't have any of these pixels, any of these colors on it, there's essentially no vegetation, or I scraped that vegetation off and I just kept the taller plants on the landscape. And so looking at the scale here, light colors and brown are shorter vegetation. And in this case, it goes up to 50 feet. And so we can see it along this ravine. We have a lot of tall trees and then some shorter trees and shrubs out in this landscape. And one of the cool things that we can do with that then is, let's say if we did have a property like this, we could load that in there and then clip this data out and calculate what percentage of this cover or of this land does have tree cover of some sort. And so in this case, it's looking like maybe 30%. And that's a much better estimate if the data is recent. Let's say, first of all, we got to qualify that because this is expensive data to collect, and it's collected at a state and national level right now with a lot of funding that goes into those things. But typically we have just one observation. But if you're within a year or two, this data is pretty reliable and at least gives you a good estimate of what that land or that tree cover is on a property versus doing transects out on it. You can imagine if you're doing a couple transects out here, this, instead of just having transects, you have all these points on that landscape to calculate canopy cover. And let's see if this video works. I actually added this during the talks as I thought about it. Someone brought up forest inventories that was covered, and you can have LiDAR on a plane, or you can do what's called terrestrial LiDAR. And that's what this person's showing here, where you essentially have a tripod and a laser that rotates 360 degrees around and up and over. And it just scans the landscape and takes measurements of everything that it hits. And from that, you can get these products where here they've done a transect through the woods. So they took this tripod and moved it to different locations. They did a scan there. You can actually see where the scans happened because there are these black spots on the ground. There was one, there's one, there's one, there's one. And so you can see where they put the tripod because it can't see directly below itself, but it can see everything else around it. And so they were manually moving this thing through. And that in the future, you can also do these, put it on like a four-wheeler above your head, you know, obviously, because you don't want to be hitting your head every time, like scanning your head every time, and just drive a four-wheeler through an area, put it on a truck, things like that. And so these are different ways to take, again, all these different measurements that you can then load into a software and analyze different things that you want to, whatever it is that you want to analyze. Okay, so that's all the LiDAR data. The other thing that we've been using for a while now, over 50 years, is spectral data from satellites mostly, but also airplanes. And what that looks like is, instead of measuring the distances and getting a GPS point for everything on the landscape, you're looking at the spectral characteristics of that thing. So essentially the light that's reflected off of it. And so then you're sampling the electromagnetic spectrum. And we've probably all seen this back in high school. You can go from short wavelengths to longer wavelengths. And the visible light that we can see with our eye is just a small portion of that entire spectrum going across here. And spectral imagery, if you just have a normal camera, it's RGB, red, green, blue. And so it's just sampling 3 things in there. But we can also sample outside of the visible spectrum, and that gives us additional information about what we're seeing on the landscape. And so when you're thinking about black and white imagery, all you're doing for that is collecting one value that is the sum of the amount of light that's reflected across the red, the green, and the blue. That entire spectrum is boiled down to one number, and that's just a black and white image then. Like I said before, normal cameras nowadays, color cameras are RGB, and so it takes a measurement in the red, the green, and the blue, and then it can create a colored image from that. Multispectral cameras are like, if you've ever heard of Landsat, the RAP, Rangeland Assessment Platform, I think it was using Landsat. Landsat is always at 30-meter resolution, and that's why that product was continually there. If you saw, it was always 30-meter resolution. We've been collecting that data worldwide for over 50 years now, and it's built into a lot of different landscape monitoring. But it has some shortcomings because it is only measuring, in Landsat's case, what's different across time because there's different satellites, but around 7 bands is what they've been collecting. But if you get into hyperspectral, that's the new frontier of all this. It's almost continuous data. You have hundreds or thousands of bands that are being measured. And so here it shows it as continuous, but these are actually split up, and there's small gaps in between these. And that gives you all sorts of information about what you're seeing on the ground. And what that can look like is data like this. And so we'll quickly go through this is showing. Wavelength is on the x-axis, and you're going from shorter to longer wavelengths. And these profiles are from hyperspectral data. If you had something like Landsat, which has the 7 bands, it would only measure in these windows, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 there. 6 is actually a band that's farther out, and so they don't show it often in things. It was added later, and so that's why it seems out of sequence. But if we're using hyperspectral data, we can see these nice smooth curves, and essentially, and water looks like this. It's a low reflectance across all these wavelengths, and then it cuts out pretty quickly. It does not reflect any light in these longer wavelengths. Vegetation has a very characteristic spectrum or spectral signature. And so it goes, this is the visible range right here, and it peaks in the green, and then we go into near infrared and infrared, and it jumps all of a sudden. And so we can always recognize vegetation with this characteristic curve to it. And meanwhile, something like bare soil will have a curve like this that slowly builds up over time and then is high in the near infrared, and especially in the infrared itself in the out here. So then when you have that, you can actually, different species look a little bit different using this data. So these are all different types of trees or plants. And you can see the same characteristic. It's peaking in the green, and so we see them as green. But then once it gets into the near infrared, what we can't see with our eyes is they all jump up. But there are slight differences. And so if you collect enough data, you can tell the difference between the different species on the ground. There's all sorts of complications that get into that. But again, like I said, I'm not going to pour into that too much, but this is still quite a bit of a challenge for us to do this. In lab settings, it's easier like this. But if you're actually out on landscape doing this, there's more of a challenge there. But the end goal of this sort of thing is that you would have something like this that a company produced, that you have now all the canopy in this neighborhood. You have elevations for everything, and they've done the best they could to identify the different species. And so a lot of times you have the fusion of LiDAR data and hyperspectral data into a product like this that can be really cool and useful for monitoring change over time, any of the things that you might be interested in when it comes to plant species and structure of the canopy. Which brings us to the future, because getting to this point is already a challenge. Oh, it's being developed. In the future, it'll become better and better. And some of the tools that we can use to do these things more rapidly and more accurately is drones, and then artificial intelligence. So we'll get into those. Drone imagery is useful because it can be so much higher resolution. You can collect it when you want to. But then again, some of the challenges, then like it's not like the government is going out and flying your property. Well, they probably are, but no. But like what I'm trying to say is you need to right now go out to fly it. You can't get something like Landsat for the entire globe. That's NASA and USGS sponsors that collaboration. You have to come up right now with the money to do this sort of thing. You can hire someone to come out and do it, whatever it takes. But it can be very useful, but it is still a challenge to collect it. And so this is some imagery that a few of us collected here in the NRCS in conjunction with a Soil and Water Conservation District to just try to do a pilot project, excuse the pun there, for what we might be able to use this for in the NRCS if we get permission to start flying properties and things like that. Right now, the NRCS can't even own drones. And so that's why we work with the soil and water conservation districts with their drones and go out together and collect data. But in this case, what we were trying to see is if we could tell the difference between juniper and mesquite on the landscape. And what we're looking at is just the RGB image right here, and then an elevation model that it creates from that, the software creates. And then this is one of my better classifications that I was able to come up with, and it had mesquite scattered across the landscape and a lot of juniper. And that on a pixel by pixel basis it's pretty high accuracy, around 95% accuracy. When it comes to plant accuracy, it's lower, and I don't have a number for that yet. This is a project ongoing right now. Like this is one big juniper down here, but parts of it are classified as mesquite. And that's part of the challenges in this is getting an object instead of individual pixels together. And I can get into that more later if I need to. But given that challenge and the high resolution, again, of this imagery, like here you can see individual yucca plants on the landscape. It makes this sort of data a great candidate for artificial intelligence, which we're seeing more and more in different things, whether it's your iPhone or I don't know, whatever, your iPhone, and different software where what you might see on your phone is that it'll recognize faces. Things like Facebook, I think we're doing that not too long ago too, is it'll detect a face. On my phone, I think it'll even tell who it is. And so if I want to search for pictures of my dad or something, I can write that in and it'll search them. And it's getting better and better through time. At first, it could classify what was in the picture, and then it could classify and localize that object, and then actually identify different objects in the picture itself. And the highest level and the most complex and hardest to get to is instance segmentation, or image segmentation, they sometimes call it, where it will actually outline the objects in the image. And that's where it would really help with drone imagery. Again, like maybe using AI, we could come in and classify different yucca plants and it'll count them. In this case, I wouldn't have a juniper with parts of the canopy being classified as mesquite. Trying to overcome, there are ways to get around this right now using OBIA or GeoBIA, geographic object-based image classifications, but they're pretty clunky. In the next 5 years or so, I think we'll see a lot of advancement and using AI to be able to load an image and using a model that has been constructed by another entity, whether it's Esri, who makes ArcGIS Pro and the different softwares out there, or Google. These bigger companies can train models to recognize things in images and potentially really help us out when we're looking at this stuff. And you see that with Tesla and stuff too. They're using LiDAR and spectral data to on the fly identify objects like cars and bicyclists, and there are obviously still errors in that. But also if you download iNaturalist on your phone, they, for some species, have enough data that they've trained a model to be able to recognize. You can just take a picture of a plant and the AI in that app will identify it for you. It doesn't have it for all the species in North America or anything like that, but for the species that people have taken more and more pictures of, they've been able to train models to recognize those things. And so again, I think in the next 5 years or so, we'll see this incorporated into more and more of what we do, and be able to supplement some of the things that we collect on the ground in traditional ways. And with that, that's all I have. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. That was great. Appreciate that great presentation and for your time. And thanks again to all of our door prize sponsors, Bamert Seed, Inview Range and Pasture, Native American Seed Company, Quail Forever, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, and the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. We appreciate all of your support of Plant Party. So thanks again to all of our speakers and to all of you for attending our 15th Plant Party webinar. Again, Plant Party is a quarterly advanced plant webinar training series brought to you by USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. We will be sending a link to a short survey by email, or you can type in the address you see there on the screen and chat box, or we'll pop up a QR code that you can simply hold your phone camera over and click on the link that pops up. Our next Plant Party will be on September 18th, and it'll focus on management decision points. Join us for some thoughtful discussion about when we should apply management practices. We look forward to seeing you next time, and we'll send you information to all past registrants on that event. So thank you all for attending, and thanks so much. Bye-bye.